Good evening. Welcome to Kansas City, Kansas Public Library and to our program Interviewing Savvy. And joining us today is Karen Silins, the owner of A Plus Resume and Career Services. Karen, the
All
floor is
righty.
yours.
Okay, so let's talk about interviewing and some of the difficulties people have when they're going and doing an interview. Interviewing is very interesting today, and it's changed a lot with the combination of having artificial intelligence sometimes involved, and Zoom, and text, and then phone, and being in person sometimes. So, we're going to talk about all those things. The classic phone interview is what we're all used to. You send in a resume, they're interested, they call to chat with you for a little bit, and hopefully invite you on site for an interview. That is what we're used to. But now, sometimes your phone interview is with artificial intelligence, and you'll know it. They'll tell you typically ahead of time. And what will happen is they'll ask you usually about five, six questions. That's all they'll ask. And when they ask them, usually there's some weird question in there. Recently, my clients have been asked things like, "What's your favorite dessert?" I don't know what that tells them. Or, "What's your favorite movie quote?" And I have to be honest, do any of us have a movie quote that we'd really share with them? Usually our movie quotes are politically incorrect. So that kind of question can really not set the interview off in the best way. But the other questions, you only have so much time to answer it, and then they just cut you off and go to the next question. Be prepared for that. Those questions, they can be anything. Unfortunately, there is no guide to it. It's whatever the interviewer wants to put in the questions. Next is a text interview. I had a friend who was in a parking lot getting in their car, and they got this little text from a very large company here in town that everybody knows the name of. And it said, "Would you like to interview?" And they thought, "Oh, good, they're setting up an interview for me." Nope. The minute he said yes, the interview started. Questions started coming across text to him. And he was horrified. He's like, "I'm trying to get in my car and drive." So that does happen sometimes. If it happens to you, don't answer yes, don't answer no. Instead, answer, "When can we set up a time?" Don't give a positive or a negative. Just say, "When can we set up a time?" Because you don't know if it's a person texting you or a computer. Next is the two-way video interview. And we're going to talk some about that because, oh my gosh, and one of the things you're going to see is have a proper backdrop on your phone interview. But the two-way video interview is just like we're essentially doing now. I can see you, you can see me. Next is the video versus artificial intelligence. No one likes those interviews. Similar to what you're getting when you're talking to AI on the phone, now you're having it on the computer in front of you. It does the same thing as the phone does. It only gives you a certain amount of time to start answering the question. And then if you don't get an answer in as quickly as they think you do, it goes to the next question. But it can be a bit longer. And there are some tools to practice online, but they're not necessarily what a company would ask you. So I don't know how totally useful they are, other than getting used to talking to a computer and not a person. Then what happens when you can't ask any questions? Typically, in an AI interview, you don't get any chance to ask questions. That's okay. AI interviews are typically similar to a screening interview. And even though in a screening interview, you usually get the chance to ask at least one question, here, you know that you're not going to get to ask likely. And if you do, just have a couple questions in case they say, "Do you have any questions for us?" to see if they'll actually answer them. Lastly, is the salary question. I am not a fan of them asking anything in a screening interview, of course, about salary, but they will sometimes. But when we get into the in-person or usually the video interview, they may start talking about salary. One of the best things I can tell you for answering that question is answer the question with a question. And yes, it might annoy him a little bit, but it won't annoy him as much as you think. So let's say they say, well, what were you thinking that you were going to get paid? So here's the thing you need to know. When it asks you on their website what your anticipated salary is, whether you gave them a range like say 60 to 70,000, or it just asks you for a number and you put 65,000 in there. Make sure you write that down for that company. You could send an email to yourself with that company's name in it and say salary. Write it down. Now you could say, well, now I did say 65,000 when I answered, without knowing anything really truly about your benefits or as much about the job as I do now. What is your range that you're looking at? You'll be shocked. Sometimes they will answer that question. And they'll say, well, and I just had a client have this happen. And they said, well, we were more looking at, 55 to 65, so that would be the top end, but we're not saying that you couldn't get there. They answered it. Don't assume they won't answer. You've already given them some guidelines, chances are, because most of those online applications ask you to put a salary on it. You've already done that, then know what you told them. That's one of the biggest dangers I find that people run into. They have no clue as to what they said for that company. They're not consistent in what they asked for, and that creates a problem. So now let's talk about how to have the best possible screening interview. Use a hands-free headset or a landline. That could include a traditional interview. Okay. So every once in a while, you're not going to be able to talk to the people that you most want to talk to in person. The only way you can talk to them is via video.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very specific reason for that. If you talk to them because they're, on video and you're not using something that's quality as far as your sound, there's a problem. Similarly, when you're doing phone. Doesn't matter whether it's a 45-minute interview or it's a 5-minute screener. If the sound isn't good, there's a problem. And here's what happens. So I have a landline here. If I put it on speakerphone, chances are they're about to get an echo. If you put your cell phone on speakerphone, they're about to get an echo. They don't like that. A headset usually eliminates that. And you want to even ask them, if you're on phone, can you hear me okay? And is there an echo? Because you can usually do some adjustments and eliminate that. If you annoy the interviewer, you do not move forward in the interview. As far as this goes, you need to make sure it's quiet in the background. I mean, nobody can hear anything. I don't have dogs in here. My husband's at a meeting up at the church. I don't have dogs in here. I don't have music playing. There's no television. There's no nothing. For an interview, it should be silent on your end other than when you talk. That is another thing that I find people do a lot of, and it's extremely distracting to the interviewer. And it's a main complaint I get from my clients who hire people. Next is consult your notes. Have everything in front of you. When you're talking to that company, you should know the resume and cover letter you sent to them, and it should be in front of you. Same thing with that listing. I would immediately, if you're going to apply for a job, copy the job listing, stick it in an email, put the name of the company and say job listing, and send it to yourself. Now you have it when you need it. Any research that you find out about the company, maybe you go to Glassdoor and you research some salaries there. Or you're spending time looking them up online. And you want to be sure to share some of that or have it in front of you if you need it. That is very useful. All right. Turn off your call waiting on a phone and your text alerts. Because here's what they hear in the background. Beep, beep. Every time somebody texts you, every time somebody tries to call you, there's a beep in the background on your phone. And sometimes you're actually doing the video interview with your phone. They can still hear that beep. Don't make them hear a beep. And I always joke with people, if you don't know how to turn that off, it should be in settings. There should be a place to turn it off in settings. But if you don't know how to turn it off, ask a teenager. They know how to turn that off. Have a proper backdrop. So here's the problem with a lot of people's backdrops. Because they may not feel good about what they have as a backdrop at their house, they go to a restaurant or something. That's a bad idea. Too much noise. If you can get into the library and use one of their conference rooms and, that's okay with them, well, then that's different because that should be fairly quiet. But quite frankly, the background should just be something plain. I've got a bookcase behind me and it's got career books in it. And there's very limited decor items, very limited. So there's not a bunch of distractions in the background. If you just put a plain sheet in back of you, there's no personality there. But sit in front of a beautiful picture, a nice bookcase like this with proper books in the background, or a nice credenza that has something like that in the background. Sometimes people have very interesting tile work, or they have like wallpaper. It's in an ornate little section on their wall. You can sit in front of something like that as well. I have a client right now. He happens to be in the military, but on his back wall are some really nice pictures of different things with him and his wife who have both served the country. That is fine. There's nothing wrong with bringing a little personal into it. But I've also had people in the background who've had a pot leave. And I'm like, that's going to leave. Bunches of bottles of liquor. And I'm like, how much do you drink? You think people know better. They don't. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on. So be sure that your background looks nice. Now, a lot of people will say, well, wait a minute. I'm just going to use one of those things that fuzzes out the background. When you fuzz out the background, you'll put your hand up to make a reference to something and your hand will go away. Your ear will go missing. It's always doing some blurring of you that's distracting to the interviewer. No weird blurry backgrounds, okay? Just do a normal background at your house, especially if you got a laptop or a phone, you can move it. Now, with my desk, when I do something like this, I actually back it up towards the bookcase. So it's not, so there's not a ton of other stuff to look at. But don't be afraid to move when you can around to a place where you can have something that you really like in the background. And it's nice, but it's not too much. There's not 45 pictures on the wall, that kind of stuff. The biggest thing for a lot of people is to be alone in the room and to tell the people who live with you, because people do this. My clients tell me horror stories. I know a little kid sometimes does not know not to come in. And usually interviewers are cool with that. It only happens once or twice. Your adult child knows not to come in. Your husband should know not to come in, and yet they will come in and ask you questions while you're on your interview. Tell them at the painted death they better not do that. And I've got horror stories of my clients having to do that with their family members. People sometimes don't understand that when you're online talking to somebody, that's not their time to come in and have a chat. Take your notes by hand. If you're on a computer like I am, which is a desktop, then if you've got a very quiet, and I mean you can't hear it, keyboard when you type, you might be okay. But you also might be shaking the desk if you could see me. It depends on what you're doing, you could be shaking things. Same with a laptop. I would just make it easy for yourself. Take your notes by hand. Have a glass of water nearby. That should be like your number one thing on your list to go get a glass of water first. If you don't have water, you will be so thirsty in that interview, you will not believe it. You'll be dying of thirst. So, glass of water or coffee if you're a coffee person. Use a mirror if you're on a phone interview. We make faces on a phone interview that we would never make on an in-person interview. But those faces can impact how we sound, and they can impact the trajectory of that interview. Let's say you get a bad question on a phone interview that you didn't like having to answer and you didn't think you answered it well. Now you're kind of upset. You got your brow furrowed and you're kind of frowny faced. Then you get another question and you don't, oh, I didn't answer that one well either. And the next thing you know, your face is hot and your ears are red and the whole 9 yards. That interview is about to go down the sewer. What do? Have a mirror sitting there so you can see your face. I had a client, now I'm not going to put the expletives that he did when he called me up. He goes, Karen, that stuff worked. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, I had an interview just like you were talking about, and I didn't answer a question well. And so now I'm kind of upset with myself. And then the next question I didn't answer well. And I took a look in the mirror next to me, and I did not have the smiley face on me anymore. And he said, I forced myself to smile. Before the end of the interview, they invited me on site for an in-person interview. That's the difference it can make. Sometimes we're going to answer a question, and it's probably more our impression of how we answered it than how they think we really answered it. Eliminate some of that problem, though, where you might allow that interview to go off the rails by having that mirror nearby. Have questions for the interviewer, but it depends on who the interviewer is. If they are an internal recruiter or HR person, they only know so much about that job. So your questions might be more about things like, what are you doing as far as hiring for the growth you talked about, to see if they're hiring more people. Some companies want to talk about all the wonderful growth they have, but they're only hiring 2 people for it, and they're a big company. So you want to find that kind of stuff out. That's a question they would likely know. You can also ask them, how do you feel the company's been doing in the last few years? Get them talking a little bit, but ask them more genericized questions. I always tell my clients, never play stump the interviewer. If you start asking specifics about this job, chances are they don't know. And now they're upset or they feel awkward because they don't have the answers for you. If it's the boss, though, they should have answers now, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Questions that you can ask for them. Dress appropriately. So I also have horror stories. My colleagues and I share them that we hear about, and my clients share some hilarious things that they have seen when they're in on interviews. People showing up to an interview at a nice company for an office job in their jogging suit. And it's, got baby goo on it. I understand that you may not have the fanciest of clothes, but that's not really appropriate. People showing up in their jeans with holes all over in them and, tennis shoes and things like that. And, they could have done a little bit better. For a video interview or a phone interview, I recommend you wear nicer clothes, a nice blouse. I'm not concerned if you have jeans on, depending upon how much they can see of you. But if you have a nice blouse or a nice dress shirt on, so you look more the part, that makes a difference. But if there's a possibility, and I think that is with everyone on a video interview, that, oops, I might have to stand up suddenly, have pants on. I know that we think people don't really do that, and that's just in the commercials, but people really do that. They really do. And so what a surprise for the interviewers when the person stands up and all they have on is their tidy whities. Nobody wants to see that. If you want to wear a pair of dress pants because it just makes you feel better and makes you feel more like you're in an interview, do it. It will pay dividends to you. Similarly, do so on a phone call. The last thing you want to do is be in your PJs taking the phone interview. You don't feel professional. You don't look professional. And chances are your answers and things aren't going to sound as professional. Dress the part for an in-person interview. There are plenty of times today we go into an actual company, an interview. And that can include everything from your socks to your shoes to the clothes on your back. When you dress for an interview, it's wonderful that women do not have to feel the need to wear a skirt anymore. I'm not saying that a skirt's bad. I'm a girly girl, so I like that kind of stuff. I'd probably wear a nice dress or a skirt. But I do understand if you want to wear slacks. If they're nice slacks and maybe they're part of an outfit, go for it. Just make sure everything's clean. That's the main thing. Your shoes, no open-toed shoes. You'll see people, they'll come in and they'll be dressed kind of nice, and then they'll have like flip-flops on, and you're thinking, we're not at the pool, you know? So be sure to have closed-toed shoes, women or men. Hosiery are fine if women want to wear them. I personally love the new pantyhose that are out that you can't cut them. You can't cut them. I love those. They last for a long time and they're worth the price. Because, when you're older, you don't necessarily have a big fondness for your legs and how they always look, especially when you're as pale as I am. So I will put on a pair of hose. They're nude in color. Or if it's in the middle of the winter, I might wear tights. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're going into an interview and you have a nice pair of slacks on, but you want some hose on your feet, you do it. If it makes you feel more confident, it's not going to hurt you. Not everybody's going to run around, and they're 22 and they have beautiful legs and they can do that. Now, men sometimes like to wear cutesy socks. Not for the interview, just normal socks. I'm not saying you have to go, I can only wear black or I can only wear blue. I don't care if they've got a little design and stuff on them, but let's save your Charlie Brown, Chiefs, socks, all that kind of stuff for other days. Makeup. So for people who wear makeup, I always recommend less is more, but some is necessary for women especially, because those lights that are in offices are not making us look that attractive in the first place. So why would we not do a couple simple things? Lip gloss that's got some color to it, so it doesn't have to be fancy. A little blush and some mascara. That'll do most people. If you're a little older, I'm 57, my eyebrows will disappear because they're salt and pepper gray if I don't color over them. So I color over them. That's okay. Other than that, if you don't want to wear any other makeup, you don't have to. If you're like me, again, I'm a girly girl, so I will put it all on. That's me. But I definitely tell people, if you go into an interview, people are very visual today. So a little bit of that just uplifts your face. It makes you look more professional. It's not an ad so you can, buy a certain makeup brand. It's all about just going in and feeling your best. Your hair needs to be clean, brushed, and actually women are rarely the problem here. It's guys. Sometimes, I'm just going to say it, will come in looking like they just got up out of bed. No comb in the hair, no nothing. Come in with your hair combed and clean. Cleanliness of person and clothing. Just say no to perfume and cologne. Scent. People are highly sensitive to scents, and I'm one of those people. And some people put on perfume or cologne really heavily. And so that bothers people who have sensitivities to it. Similarly, if you smoke, you better make sure that you don't smell of smoke that day. If people smell that on you, they can discriminate against you, and I don't want that to happen. Let them find that out after they hire you. And jewelry. You can have some jewelry on. You can have a necklace on. Now, I have 3 rings on, and they're, 2 of them are bigger. I would go with diminutive rings, probably something a little smaller, and my wedding ring. And I might have, if I was going to have, say, a cross on, I'd have something that was a little plainer. But you can still have that on. You can have some nice earrings on. There's nothing wrong with that. The one thing to avoid is bangle bracelets that jingle and jangle together. Don't put those on. That makes too much noise. So, for an in-person interview, be there early, 10 to 20 minutes. Drive to that location ahead of time if you don't already know where it is. And I mean, like, you've been in that area before. Drive there, scout out the parking, look at the entrance. Do you have to pay for parking? What's going on? And anticipate traffic snarls on your way. Usually, your GPS or Google are good about telling you those things, but you still just want to be careful. That's why I tell people I would start out and have an extra 20 minutes that you can hang out in the parking lot if you need to. Now, I would definitely shake hands with them, and a lot of people are like, oh, I can't shake hands with somebody. Most people today are back to shaking hands. They're not avoiding it anymore. If they don't want to shake hands, though, they're just worried. Maybe they have a cold, or they're just worried about getting ickies, So don't be offended and say, oh, no, that's fine. I know a lot of people are still worried about getting cold or whatever. Take notes. There's actually a book out there that says, don't take notes during your interview. And I thought that person's lost their ever-loving mind. Interviews are full of information, especially an in-person one. You're there half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour, sometimes even more. The last thing you want to do is forget a bunch of stuff. Write it down. Avoid slang in your interview. Talk about military and paramilitary terms. Too much of that, if you're coming from the military, it's one of the things I train my clients on. Acronyms that they don't understand. Everybody pretty much knows what OSHA is, but there's a lot of acronyms out there. I mean, we're full of it. The government, the military, companies, universities, you name it, all have acronyms for stuff. Not everybody understands those acronyms. So you might want to actually say what the acronym is. And then terms they likely won't know. Something may be specific to an industry you're coming from, but you're going to a different industry. Also, sometimes your company uses very specific language for something that maybe it's manufacturing, and you're talking about the returns that people send back where there's maybe a issue with the product. But your company has some fancy name for it. Well, you probably just ought to call it returns so everybody knows what you're talking about. No gum. Oh, I can't tell you how often you see gum. A lot of gum. Mints, tobacco chew, smell of cigarette smoke, all of that kind of stuff is a no-go in an interview. Turn off your phone. Nothing like I'm sexy and I know it coming on in the middle of your interview. And people have those songs on their phones. It's hilarious. And they'll come on. But even if it's just a ring, you don't want that disturbing you. Turn the phone off. Unless there's someone literally on their deathbed that you need to know about, a close family member or best friend, turn it off. And then if you do have to have it on because there is a member of your family like that, you tell them that's why you have it on. Then if it rings, they're like, uh-oh, but at least they expect it. Sit for success. I would sit with both your feet planted on the floor, flat onto the floor. I would not sit cross-legged. And let me tell you why. You ever watch people who sit cross-legged if they're nervous? What do they start doing? bouncy, 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 bouncy with the leg. However, the person cannot see you a lot of times because you're behind their desk. And now it looks like you're doing this in the background. They have no idea why. And I get people telling me these stories, which are just so funny. Because you have a lot of friends in HR, and their stories are just an absolute riot. And they're like, what is a person having a seizure? What's going on? The other thing is the people that bounce their leg. If you have a habit of doing that, then you need to turn the foot that you're most likely to bounce over to the side. So instead of having them both like this, let's say it's your right foot that you normally do that to, you turn it like this. So it's kind of sitting at an angle. So you can't bounce it. Because if you bounce it, you're going to annoy the heck out of them. If they can see your feet, they will want to reach over and make you stop. If they can't see it, then you look like you're bouncing again. Avoid that. Be positive in how you speak. You can even talk about something that's a negative outcome in your background, and you can frame it in a way that helps you. For instance, a lot of people get a question, tell me about a time you didn't handle a situation correctly with a coworker. I would go back to when I was waitressing back in college, and a young gal who was actually a friend of one of my fellow graduates, she was actually her sister, came in to work at the restaurant. And she really struggled with the job. Waitressing's not easy. And one day, the cook was kind of giving her some hooey for it. So I took the card out of her hand and gave him the order. And I realized when I gave her back the card, she was embarrassed. And I learned something from that. I learned you praise in public and you criticize in private. What I should have done is stood with her and say, let's talk about this for a minute. And the cook could have just gotten over himself because I would razz him just as much as he razzed me. And I could have just told him, be quiet. And that's what I should have done. I went out and apologized to her. I sat down at a booth and said, I should not have done that. Let me go over this with you one by one so you can get used to this. That is a positive way of handling it, but it's still something you did that didn't work out right. Keeping it positive helps you. And lastly, remember in an interview, because we're going to talk about asking them questions, you're interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you. And if you forget that, what happens is you don't ask questions. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes and why that's bad. So now let's talk about types of interviews. First, we think of behavioral interviews. Tell me about a time when. Give me an example of. If this happened, how would you handle it? Describe the time when. You'll hear them called several things: behavioral, situational, performance, and competency-based. It's all the same thing. Somebody just wanted to write a book, so they called it something different. I want you to use the acronym CAR and create some best of the best examples of things you did in your career and some day-to-day stuff. And I would highly recommend you go through your resume and go, oh, yeah, I can talk about that. I can talk about a specific day I did something like that. Updated a manual, created a spreadsheet, and why you needed to do that. A project you worked on that went really well, that kind of stuff. And use challenge, action, and result to create it. So there's a lot of people that say, well, I like to add task in there. So, we like the STAR method. No. And here's why. People have to be able to remember if they get a question that's a behavioral question that's out of the norm for them, not one they've maybe prepared for, that they can automatically go to something that makes sense for them. We think very well in 2s and 3s. Start adding additional digits to that, we start getting confused. You need to have a process where when somebody asks you a question, you automatically go to something like, oh, I'm just going to go to car, challenge, action, and result. Let's see. So there was that time when, and you're off and running, but it still keeps you succinct. It still keeps you running in the right direction. The more letters you add to car, you make it star, C star, and all these other things, the harder it's going to be for you to communicate that and remember it when one of those questions comes to you off the cuff. There's a reason the ends of zip codes, meaning like 64131. So 131, a 3-digit. The beginning or the prefix for a phone number and the area code, they're in 3s. And if you hear people say things about their phone number, you'll hear the last 4 numbers often done in 2s. 3269 instead of 3269. Or 3019 instead of 3019. Okay? There's a reason for that. So keep it simple. You will have better answers. Next, case studies. They're actually going to give you a giant challenge, action, and result example on the page. They're going to hand you a piece of paper and it's going to have a paragraph or 2 on it. Read it twice. Then give them your answer. When you read it twice, you get more detail. The first time you see a movie, you only see so much of it. Second time you see a movie, you're like, I don't even remember that in the first one. The first time I watched it, you get additional detail. Demonstration interviews. Have you ever walked in and they said, hey, sell me this pen? That's awkward for a salesperson. Or let's say you're a whiz at programming and now they want you to program something for them, but you weren't expecting that. Expect that could happen. A group interview versus a panel interview. A panel interview is planned. They've chosen people from very select areas of the company to come interview you. It'll be like a VP of operations and an HR director and the person who's going to be your boss and a couple of your teammates. They'll all have questions. A group interview is we were running up and down the hall about 10 minutes before you got there, seeing who we could get in for the interview. That's the difference. Doesn't mean it can't be a good interview. It just means not as much prep has gone into it. Sequential interviews. Have any of you ever gone to a company and they said, oh, well, you're going to be here for half a day or a whole day? Or they said, oh, 3 people will be interviewing you, and you thought at the same time, but it turned out to be 3 different people, and 4 hours later, you were dying of hunger. You're just like, oh my gosh. That's a sequential interview. So first of all, find out how many people are interviewing you. And then always ask them if there's more than one, is that going to be, will they be sequential or will they be concurrent? So you want to know, are they at the same time or are they going to spread this out? Because you're going to want to bring a little bit of food. You're going to be dying. Stress interviews. This is the stupidest of all interview types. I don't know why anybody does this. They are potentially nasty to you in the interview. They say things that are not good. They are trying to test to see how you deal with a stressful situation. These companies, they're not the CIA. They don't need to be doing that to you. I would seriously question wanting to work for them. But I will tell you, a good company, at least at the very end of it, even though they need to stop doing that type of interview, will actually at the end tell you, hey, we want to let you know we're not jerks. We did a stress interview and you did great. And we just wanted you to know that. You're okay. You're all right. If they don't say anything, they're probably just jerks. The free information interview. Sometimes you're thinking, I want to change my career, but I want to learn something about the career I'm looking to get into. Get some interviews with some people in the industry, in the job type you want to change into, and talk to them. Say, I'm not looking for a job. I'm just looking to do like a 15-minute interview with you. And then you ask them, why did you choose this career? What do you like most? What do you like least? Do I need any special education or certifications or licensing to do this career? That kind of stuff. That's a free information interview. Watch the interviewer's body language. So I had a client interviewing with this company, and she had 3 people she was interviewing, or that were interviewing her. And she asked them, tell me what you like best about working here. And she said, they may as well have had a sign up like they were a captive going, help me, I hate it here. But she said, they're like, we love it here. It's wonderful. They treat us great. He said, I knew not to go to work for them after that interview. She said it was absolutely hilarious. But she said it was also sad. They were letting them interview people, and they were obviously a terrible place to work, or at least that boss was. The other thing is I had a client who was interviewing, and he was asking about how much overtime they have to work. And they said, oh, you only do it when we have a specific project. And usually there are bigger projects. It happens 3-4 times a year. It only goes on for a couple weeks, and it'll probably be a 50-hour work week that week. But other than that, no, we don't really do that. And then she did some things. She kind of voice inflected and talked a little higher and was speeding up. And then she, moved herself up in her chair and back down. That's often a lie. And then she also did this. It doesn't mean that a person's absolutely lying. Their nose could just itch because they've got allergies. But when they do those 3 things together, they're lying to you. And if you study body language, and I do, there's a lot to be said for that. Well, he goes, I saw 3 things, and I went, she's right, they do all 3 of them. And so he says, I'm going to see if they really mean this. He was interviewing at like 4:30 in the afternoon. So his interview was over at 5:15, something like that. He goes down the street to the Home Depot, stays there for about 45 minutes, comes back. It's about 6 o'clock. All the cars are still there. Then he goes and runs another errand. Comes back at 6:45. All the cars are still there. He then calls his wife, who's nearby, and says, let's go to dinner. And at 7:45, he drives by there, and all the cars are still there. So he gets invited back for an interview. And they said, well, do you have any questions before we get started? And I think it was the gal that interviewed him originally and a couple of other people now. And he said, well, I was kind of curious. Have you had any large projects lately or anything that would cause you to work overtime? And they said, well, no. And then he told them what he did. And he said, I just wonder how you'd respond to that. And she totally ignored it and just started asking him other questions. They offered him the job. He's like, no, I'm not that desperate. So if you, in the back of your mind, are going, there's something not right about this, listen to that voice. Your eyes see a lot more subconsciously than you realize. And they will see little things like that and go, oh, I don't like that. I think they're lying to you. And people don't trust that little voice, and it gets them in trouble every time. So if the little voice in the back of your head goes, I think I'd ask more about that, I believe I'd ask more about it. Then get everything that they tell you in writing in the employment contract. I had a client recently have their contract rescinded because, and it was a good thing, this company lied to him. Instead of the $95,000 a year they promised, it was 75. Instead of the 3 weeks of vacation, it was 2. And instead of the $10,000 bonus, it was a $5,000 bonus. And he negotiated. He said, hey, and so they gave him 85, and then we made a mistake on the vacation. I'm like, no, they didn't. And so they gave him 3. But, oh, no, that's the bonus. And so I said, now, if you push back one more time, they could be angry about it. They didn't act angry at all. They just rescinded the offer. But like he said, that was probably a God wink. He's got a good job now, And he doesn't have to deal with them lying to him all the time. If they are going to lie to you before you ever start working for them, what are they going to do to you when you do? And they think you're now captive. Don't let them lie to you like that. Get everything in writing. What are your benefits? What are they going to pay you? When is your first review? All of it. And if they won't put it in writing, I would not go to work for them. Illegal job interview questions. These don't happen a ton. And usually when they do, it's actually just because we don't train people in how to interview. And it's usually things like a disability thing. Instead of saying, can you lift 50 pounds? They'll go, well, do you have any disabilities that keep you from lifting things? It's like, no, don't say that. My former boss, years and years and years and years ago, God bless him, he's a sweetheart. And I made him stop doing this, by the way, when I started working there because I was the HR person. He asked me if I was married, how many children did I have? Where did my husband work? Blah, blah, blah. He was just being conversational. And if you know in the back of your mind, you don't feel weird about it. You're just like, oh, I don't know. Answer their questions. They're not trying to do anything to you. Most interviewers actually are never trained. We think, gosh, don't they do this? No, they really don't. I answered all his questions. Didn't have a problem with it. He hired me on the spot. There is something about knowing that they're not being weird or trying to find out secret information about you, that you can answer those questions and you'll be fine. But if the little thing in the back of your head's going, I wouldn't answer that, I'd say the following. Well, why do you ask? And find out. Okay? Asking questions in any interview. I think this is exceptionally important. Interviewers love to play the game of not allowing you to ask anything until the end of the interview. We don't let them play that game because if you have a question or the 5 or 6 you should have in a 45-minute interview at the end of the interview, they're annoyed because they've got things to go do. However, if you have no questions at the end of the interview, they're also annoyed with you. You can say to them, I like to have more of a conversation. And most interviews, actually, when you get right down to it, typically are much more conversational. So you'll be able to ask your questions here and there throughout the time. But if they say, well, we want you to wait till the end, I would absolutely push back and say, I find that if we don't have a conversation ongoing, at the end, there isn't time for the questions, no matter how well-meaning that somebody could be. And I hope you'd agree that we're interviewing each other. It's not just one way. And if they don't like that, that tells you everything you need to know about them. Because I've had clients push back like that. I don't know how many times in the last 25 years I've been doing this. And it's rarely a problem. And what people will do is, well, they'll go, well, yeah, that makes sense. They'll do things like that. They won't go, no, you can't ask questions till the end or you die. There's none of that going on. And if somebody pushes back that much, they made themselves look bad. And I'd say use questions that are both informational for you and that show you have interest as a candidate. We've already talked, never play stump the interviewer. So don't ask them questions like in the screening interview about specifics on the job when they can't answer it. So let's talk about some of the questions I have on my list on the next page, and about a page or so. Why is this position available? You want to know, is it new or is it existing? And if it's existing, what's going to change? That's why. The next question, you got extra time? Feel free to ask it. Not something you have to ask off the cuff. Same with number 3. Number 4, though, would be really interesting. If some of these people have been there that are interviewing you for 10 years, 15 years, how has the company changed since you started working here? They love questions like that because they get crappy questions all day. They get, so how much are you going to pay me? Oh, my grandmother paid for me to take a trip to Italy. It'll be right after I start, and it'll be for 4 weeks. Is that going to be a problem? I mean, these are real things that people have done. So, what are you doing to stay competitive in your industry? That's a fair question. And it could be one that potentially you could ask in the screening interview. The next one is definitely potential for a screening interview. Where are you seeing the most growth in the company right now? How are you staffing that growth? Again, if they're seeing growth everywhere, but they aren't staffing it, now you know you're going to have a lot extra hours. A lot of my clients ask the next question and they get a great reaction from the interviewers. If you were to rank them, what are the top 3 traits your top performers have in common? This is showing interest in the job and showing interest in what you might share with those top performers that ultimately you might be able to give an example to them on. Next, number 8 is marked on the next page, and it's marked in bold for a reason. If you're going to ask one question the whole time, this will be the question you will ask of the person who will be your boss. Can you describe your management style and give me 3 examples? Why do you want 3? And they're not going to answer that. Oh, yes, they do. They answer it for my clients all the time. What are you doing here? 1, you want to see how they describe their management style. But you want them to back it up with real examples. And most bosses, even if they're a horrible micromanager, have a very specific answer for this. They've already come up with one that's like, oh, I train you and love you and hug you and set you free. That's what they'll give you. But the next 2 examples are, and I'm going to tell you, you always do things wrong and make you do it over again and all of that. Get the 3 examples. And it's funny, every once in a while, my clients will ask that and the interviewers will go, that's kind of hard. Now I realize kind of what you're going through. And I always tell them to be very sympathetic to it and go, hey, take your time. I just really want to hear how you are as a supervisor. They'll answer the question. Next, what qualities are you looking for in the ideal candidate for this position beyond what you've told me so far? The reason you're asking this is you want to get past whatever they're reading to you off a job description. And they do have a tendency sometimes to just go down that description. If they're your boss, they should know a lot more about that position than just what's on the description. They should be able to say, hey, we're also looking for this and we're looking for that. That's extra information. That's extra information others didn't get. And it's potential information you could use in a thank you note back to them or a thank you letter. What are the opportunities for advancement? Now, I tell people, I don't know how much I would always ask that question. I kind of like the other part of it. Do you offer ongoing internal, external, or paid training and other training and development opportunities, say maybe a professional conference? Take these questions and ask them in your way. You don't want to make a smaller company really nervous because they usually don't have an internal university like T-Mobile does. You don't want to make them too nervous, but you do want to know if they're going to give you the ability to keep your skills sharp. And this isn't just about using Microsoft Excel. If you're a salesperson, do they have stuff for sales? Sales methodologies, not just product updates. If, say, you're in marketing, do they continue your skills in Adobe Creative Suite or how to write better ad copy? If you're in an administrative role or a management role, maybe you do a lot of project management. Will they help you potentially get your PMP, which is project management professional? All of those things are valid. And the great thing is a smaller company may not have anything internal for you beyond don't sexually harass people and keep clients' information confidential. But they may pay for you to go to conferences, which is something when they tell you that to get in the contract, in the employment contract. Because if not, money mysteriously runs out and they can't do it. Next, what is the typical tenure rate for employees in the department? If everybody seems to have been there for a very short time and it's not a new department, I think I'd be finding out why. Then, what's the biggest challenge you have? I can positively impact as a new employee. You are showing you being in the role. Now you're giving them the vision of you being there. Visioning is very powerful, and it can actually win you a role because now they're seeing you in it. Okay. Then, how would you describe your company culture? And you'll be shocked as to how many people don't know what culture is, which is why I say, what is it like to work for that particular organization? How do the employees and management interact? And then, what can you do in the first 30 to 90 days to hit the ground running for them? Visioning again. You're giving them the vision of already being in that role. And now you get some extra information that the average person wouldn't get. I would add one more thing to that. Where do we go from here? Or how does this process move forward? Just so you know, maybe they're doing second interviews. Maybe they're making their decision. Now you know. So now there's some basic job interview questions that most people hate getting. Tell me about yourself. Who likes that question? No one likes that question because we don't know what the heck they want to know. I tell people it's that 10, 20 seconds of what's on your resume, the big items that you want to share, whether it's education or certifications or, save the company $1 million, whatever it is. Then give them a little bit of personal, but you do it in a certain way. I tell people always show active brain or active mind, active creativity, and active body. So you can talk about active mind and maybe the kind of things you like to read if they're, say, journals about what you do, or they are, a lot of self-improvement stuff, but they're, like bigger things like maybe 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Person or Crucial Conversations. Or it might be that you love to play chess. People that play chess are usually pretty darn smart. Things like that mean your mind is active. It could be the types of games you love to play. Maybe you have a little handheld that you constantly play games on, and it's not, the farm game or, let's go out and kill the warriors game or whatever that one is with candy. Maybe it's puzzles. You love Sudoku. You love word games. You love numbers games. I would tell them that. Next, active creativity. Do you cook? Chances are you may be fairly creative if you love to cook. Do you garden? That's a creative aspect. Do you play music? Do you sing? Those things show creativity. Are you a crafting person? Do you love to craft? Do you do artwork? Are you a joy of painting with Bob Ross type of person? Those are all creative outlets, and they show you're a lot more than just the person that would be working in the office. And when you go home, you have other things to do, and that actually really looks good. And the other one is active body. Show them that you keep yourself in shape as much as you can. You walk the dog, or you garden. Gardening's hard. We got like 450, 500 plants out in our yards here, backyard, front yard, all that kind of stuff. We've got a lot of plants. It takes a lot to keep them up. My husband's in very good shape. It could also be that you actively work out. You maybe ride a stationary bike or a recumbent bike, or you do a rowing machine, or you go to Planet Fitness, or you play on a softball league or a bowling team. If people who say bowling isn't work haven't bowled. So there you go. And then lastly, Tell them why you want to work for them. The number one question companies ask that they rarely get a good answer to is tell us what you know our company does or what you know about our company. They can't answer it. That means you will go and do a little research. And you'll notice that's second to the last on the list here. People are terrible at answering that question. The next one, walk me through your resume. I hate that question because it says, I didn't bother to read your resume. That's a lazy interviewer. But you don't know what they've got going on. So you might want to ask them, hey, I want to make sure you have some time to look at it. I'll be happy to walk you through it. But do you want a couple minutes to take a look at it? It happened to a good friend of mine. And they were like, no, that's fine. You can just tell me. That does not say to me that you care. And that's what he thought. What are your biggest weakness or what's your biggest weakness? They didn't ask for weaknesses. They said biggest weakness. Do not talk about how much of a workaholic you are, which people who usually say that aren't. 2, that you're too much of a people person, which means I won't get any work done. Or 3, that you're a perfectionist. Instead, say something like, I can get involved in a project sometimes and I have to set a clock because if I don't, I'm going to kind of start digging in the weeds. I'm getting, analysis paralysis. So I need to stop and let it move on. That would be fair to say. So think about it in those kind of terms. What would your last 3 supervisors say about you? Unless they ask you to, I keep it all positive. What are some of your hobbies? You already told them that if you got asked, tell me about yourself, which is pretty much every interview. Now, the only other thing you might want to do is if you want to mention something like golf. Golf is the international game of, business. So if you golf, that might be something to tell them about. Tell me what you know about our company/organization, of course, and why are you leaving your current position? So the answer is not they treat me poorly, I don't like my boss, or any of that. Instead, you say things like, well, the people above me aren't going anywhere, so there really isn't any place for me to go. And I'd really like to grow. I've learned so much there, but it's time for me to move on so I can continue to grow in my career. The company could be horrible. You could be worried about the boss coming through your wall with a chainsaw every day. And it's going to be, well, I've learned a lot while I've been there. Be careful what you say. If you got laid off, tell them that. There is no shame in being laid off. People sometimes think of that as being fired. You're not being fired, you're laid off. That's all that means. The big thing that sometimes you'll get asked with that is how many other people were laid off with you. Now, maybe the same day you got laid off, others didn't, but chances are in the last month or next month after, several other people did as well. So I'd mention that number. Beware of the following interview questions. How's your availability on nights and weekends? Unless you're dying to work on nights and weekends, guess what this means? So I would say, why do you ask that question? How many unplanned absences did you take last year? No one's going to answer that truthfully if they took 30. They're not going to go, yeah, I took 30 of them last year. They're not going to say that. They're going to go 2. That's what everybody says. I took 2. What's the minimum salary you would accept? That sounds really negative. I would push it back to them and say, that's a really interesting question. It sounds like it might be very low, but you guys might pay really well. What kind of range are we looking at? See what they say. You might be pleasantly surprised. Have you ever been fired? Okay, I don't care if you got fired from your job at the burger joint in high school. You don't need to tell them that. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about as an adult in real jobs, have you been fired? If you have, say yes. Don't lie to them. They will find out. Just admit it. And if they ask why, say, maybe you were going through something at the time and your performance wasn't as good as it should have been. And, they were more than justified. I even had a client he stole from the company he worked for. He told the next job that they hired him because he paid it back. He told them why. And they went, yeah, we'll take a chance. And he's had a successful career since in IT. He wasn't working in IT when he stole. Next, which parts of your resume are exaggerated? I wish I'd gotten one of these silly questions when I was interviewing back in the day, because I would have had a hilarious answer for them just to see what they would do. I would have pointed to the second job on the resume and said, you see that? I never actually worked there, just to see what they do. I've always wanted to do that, but don't do that. Instead, say to them, I understand, because people lie on their resumes all the time. And I heard that the number one thing they lie about is their college degree, which is true, by the way. And say, I know you get lied to a lot. Everything on this resume, I can speak to in detail. Don't lie on your resume. It will come back to hurt you. I ask clients sometimes things about stuff that's on an existing resume. And I'm like, yeah, we were really telling the truth here. What makes you more qualified than other candidates? That's a dangerous, 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 dangerous question. A savvy interviewer knows that you might answer it and say bad things about the other competitors that you're interviewing against, which means you won't get the job. So what you say, regardless of whether they're savvy or not, is you say, well, I don't know about the other candidates' abilities. All I can speak to are mine. What would you like to know? Don't say anything negative, even if you know all of them. You'd say, I don't know all of their qualities or all of their qualifications. I know some of them. All I can speak to is mine. What would you like to know? Don't play that game. You will lose the job. The last one, I thought people weren't really getting this question. I was just talking to a client today, and I said, I thought people didn't really get this question. And they're like, people have gotten that? Yes, a bunch of my clients have gotten this. How do you deal with demanding or rude coworkers and managers? It's kind of like the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. Karen, the bad person, would go, I don't. But you need to be good. So what would Karen the good say? He would say, well, that's really interesting. Do you have an issue with that here? And what are you doing to fix it? Why would you ask that of them? Because are they allowing nasty people to run around at the company and just run over everybody? That's not appropriate. Now, every once in a while, you'll see a horrified look on their face and they'll realize what they're asking. Like, oh, I probably shouldn't be asking that question anymore. We don't have people like that. You're probably okay. But beware when they don't really seem to want to answer your question. That tells you that chances are either the person who's going to be your boss or your coworkers are just what I call Krabby Patch dolls. They're just nasty. They're not nice to people. I wouldn't want to work there. And the least I would do is ask to meet your coworkers before I go work there. So now let's talk about the last section. 40% of what you apply for doesn't exist. This is not my number. It's Wall Street Journal article. It's a Forbes article, and that's a whole different article. CBS had a thing on it. Up to 40% easily will not happen. So they're not always fake jobs, but some of them are. Sometimes companies put jobs out there because they want to look good to their competitors, but they're not actually hiring. So you've just spent a half an hour applying. Sometimes companies want to see what the talent's like out there, so the jobs out there, but they're not actually looking to hire at that point. They may even bring you in for an interview. All you could say is, hey, that's interview experience, yippee. But there's other things that will happen. Sometimes a company can't make a decision. They've got analysis paralysis. They're looking for the perfect employee, a unicorn. They could not afford that unicorn if they found them. But that's who they're looking for. I had a friend online. She was talking with this company and she actually shared it on her LinkedIn, which I thought was great. And then she said, now this is a friend of mine. And they called me and they said, well, we've interviewed 35 people and there's something just broken in the people that are coming and interviewing for our jobs. You know, they're not qualified. And she goes, that's not what's broken. And she had to break it to him. You're the problem, not them. You interview 35 people and you can't find somebody, it's you. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes they already know who they're going to hire. Oh, going to hire the nephew. Got to put the job out there. Sometimes the person who approves the job gets the job out there. So they approve the requisition. It's out there. People are applying. It's all wonderful. 3 weeks in, the person above them goes, yeah, we can't hire for that right now. And boom, it goes away. And the one that's one of the worst, and it's almost like being catfished. So let's say you apply for a project manager's job. I'm just using that as an example because this happened to one of my clients recently. And they wanted a PMP. She did not have that, but she was like, no, I'm cool. She goes, I know I'm not going to get quite as much, but she had extensive experience. And she goes, I'm looking into it. And so they seemed all happy and everything. And they asked her what she wanted to get paid. And she was about 10,000 above what they wanted, but way too low, in my opinion. And they re-advertised the position as a project coordinator so they could pay less. I see that happen. I can't tell you how much. Marketing manager. Oh, well, now we call it a marketing coordinator or marketing assistant because we don't want to pay what everybody wants for a marketing manager. You will see that too. You will also be ghosted. If you're interviewed for more than 4 or 5 jobs, you will be ghosted. You will have a great interview. They'll act like they're all interested, and somebody's going to call you next week and you never hear back. Now, every once in a while, you can call them back and get an answer at least so you can cross it off your list. But until you actually start working in a new company, still job search. So what you want to do with this is, if you're really curious what happened, because let's face it, they're not going to have a big conversation with you about this. But you can call and leave them a message and say, well, I know that last week you said it'd be about a week and it's been just over a week and you thought you'd have a decision. I just wondered, did you need any more information from me in order to make your decision? I look forward to hearing back. And boom, you're done. Don't call them up and go, did I get the job? Did I get the job? Did I get the job? People do that. And I had one client, he wanted to punish them for not calling them back. And I'm like, stalking. This is bad. Stop stalking them. Because you never know where those people are going to be in your next time you're going to interview. So don't do that. Next is catfishing. So you go in and it says it's a marketing manager's job. And what it really is a commission-only sales job. Just turn around and walk out. I had a client was applying to go into a company to work as an administrative assistant and it's a higher level one. But it turned out what they really wanted her to do was drive people around in a bus all day who were, they had some disabilities and some of them happened to be more in the mental health issues. And they'd only been hurt a couple times, meaning the people driving the bus and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, just say no, just go. Slowly but surely, all the administrative stuff disappeared and they wanted her to go get a CDL and everything. Companies will lie sometimes. You never make it off the bench. If any of you watch basketball, football, or baseball, or hockey, sometimes some players just sit there the whole game on the bench. Some companies will do that to you. They'll act like they're interested. They'll have another conversation with you, but you'll never come in for an interview. Or if you do, they keep bringing you in. That's breadcrumbing. They're flirting. They're not hiring. They don't make a decision. I had one guy, he was so married to having this one position. He's like, well, they've interviewed me 7 times. And I'm like, I can't make a decision. And it's been 7 times over a year now. They're not going to hire you. Let it go. Let it go. Catch and release. Also similar. They get you and they love on you a little bit and then they throw you back in the water. Okay. No, you only need that to happen so many times before you should just tell them no. Obviously, you're not really wanting to hire, and I don't have time to keep coming in and interviewing with you. Every once in a while, the interviewers are looking for competitive information. If you're in manufacturing, if you're in certain marketing sectors, things like that, and you work at a competitor company, they might want to talk to you, but not for a job. And you'll know it because they'll start asking you questions they shouldn't be asking you. I had no idea how some of these companies, when I was earlier in this career, how many companies would do this. And there are a lot of companies that do it. Now, that doesn't mean they do it all the time, but they do it. And then, like we talked about earlier, every once in a while, the executive decides, you know what? We don't need to hire for that, but you've already spent your time applying and possibly interviewing for it. It does happen. That's why I tell people until you signed on the dotted line and you're starting that job, do not stop your job search. All right. So, any questions? Oh, we can turn Vicky's stuff on.
No, Karen, it's a lot of great information, and I had lots of experiences. I've had interviews where it's been I've had that progressive interview where first I was interviewing with one person, and then, well, hey, come down the hall and we'll go to this other guy's office.
Yeah, the sequential interview, and it's a shocker when you get it and they just keep asking you to interview and you're like, lunch.
Yeah, exactly. And also I've had the panel interview. It was a legitimate panel. It wasn't just a thrown together one.
They're
and
better.
I've participated in those group ones before. The boss just comes by the office and says, okay, we're going to go interview this person now. And it's like, oh, okay, great.
People don't think it's really happening. And then they're shocked when they find out. There was one time a client did get a really good set of interviewers, and they had just found out about the interview literally 10 minutes before. And they sat down and they said, now, can we read your resume for a couple minutes? And I thought, nice. And I said, you got a good interview then.
But I did also one time have, so the job actually that I have now, the transition counselor with the transition assistance program, and when they were interviewing me for this job, they were all asking questions. It was a group interview again, and the question that I got asked that absolutely blew my mind. What you're a you have a choice between all these different animals.
Oh yeah, which animal would you be?
Bear? Are you a fox?
And why?
Are you a squirrel?
Yeah.
And I ended up choosing the fox because I'm a gatherer. I gather information. I hoard things.
Yeah, I get more people telling me they're still getting asked those silly questions. If you could be any kind of animal, what kind of animal would you be and why?
Right.
But they also get almost like quiz questions sometimes. And I mean, this is not most jobs, but there are some that do it. And the quiz questions will be things like, if you dropped a penny in a baseball off of a building, a tall building taller than 150 feet tall, which would hit the ground first, and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, is this what you have your time to do?
Right, exactly.
Or my favorite one, I think Google was asking this for a while. How many golf balls can you fit on a standard size school bus? And somebody said, how the heck do I answer that? I said, so you assess how big you think a school bus is, foot wise, length and width. And then you start talking about the size of a golf ball, and that, you still got seats in there, and, where the driver is and everything. And then you start talking, well, probably if I filled up this part of it, it would be this much. You can be
Right.
way off. They're so impressed that you had the ability to estimate and you talked it through. They'll love you.
Right, exactly.
You were thinking about it logically.
Exactly.
All right, Vicky, did you have some questions? You could turn on your microphone now. Feel free to turn it on and we can hear you.
Vicky, on the left-hand side, bottom left. Mm-mm.
And it'll look like a little microphone with a line through it. Click on that and unmute yourself. Hover over towards the bottom of it, and you'll see the little microphone, and it'll have a line through it. I'm wondering.
Okay.
There we
Now,
go.
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I was just wondering if I could get a printout of this information.
Actually, you should be getting an email with it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I will send you the email, Vicky.
Okay, that's fine. That will work. Uh-huh.
Do you have any other questions?
No, no, not at this time. But if I do, I will write them down for you. What's your name?
My name is Karen. Now I have my own company.
Uh-huh.
So this is something I do for the library.
Wait a minute. Do you need some help? Because I'm looking for a job.
No, but I appreciate that. Tell me what you do though.
Well, really, I like working with kids. You know, that's
Are you like daycare?
yeah.
Okay. And how long have you been doing that?
My whole life. I mean, well, since I've been doing it for a good while.
Whereabouts in town do you live?
I'm in Wyandotte County.
Okay. So certain places that I would definitely try are the traditional daycares, but I would also look at, say, churches and synagogues and temples and stuff that have daycares too. They're always looking for people.
Okay, yes. I plan on going around in those areas myself. I'm waiting on my car to get fixed. It's in the shop. So that's one of my hold up, stand still thing is my car. And I'm ready for it to get out and about and look and stuff.
Okay.
It's been a while since it's been in there. I'll be glad when I get through. Yeah, so yeah, that's some good information.
Yeah, because a lot of times people forget that there's lots of private organizations that also have childcare, and on occasion, companies will provide childcare on site for their employees. Yeah. So you could see if there's some companies here in town that still do that.
Yeah. I'm gonna start trying to, get out here and mingle around.
Yep.
Yeah.
Karen, may I also offer the suggestion?
Please.
The American Career Center, the Career Center in the state of Kansas is called Kansas Works.
Kansas Works. They're wonderful.
And Kansas Works offices are.
I'm gonna go start going over there and get online and stuff.
Because they have their website, and on that website, employers, all kinds of different employers are on there. And there's daycares. I know there's daycares all over the place on there.
Yeah. They're all short. They're all short of people.
I'm gonna be going over there. I'm gonna do that too. Yeah. Everything I can, yes.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Kansas Works, and they do good work.
Yeah, they do.
They'll really help you.
Uh-huh.
Because I always tell people, if you're on the Kansas side, it's Kansas Works. If you're on the Missouri side, it's Full Employment Council.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions?
What would be?
Huh?
I didn't hear that. Were there any other questions?
Oh no, I was listening to her.
Okay. Elena, did you have a question?
Yes. When you answer the question, tell me about yourself. What topics would be off topic? What issues cannot you you cannot bring up? Like, what
Well, I
shouldn't you be
joke
talking
with
about?
people about hobbies that they shouldn't be sharing. And I actually use kind of outlandish hobbies when I do this, talking about the career portfolio seminar when I do it. And I say, if you like to collect twist ties, cigarette butts, and Nazi memorabilia, please let that be your little secret. So that kind of stuff where it's like, oh, nobody needs to know that. But if you're a ballroom dancer, that's worth mentioning for the exercise part. If you want to show active body and you're a dancer, yeah, you can mention that. Now, if you're dancing and there's a pole involved, I don't think I tell them that. But, yeah. But, and I don't judge that. I'm just saying, don't let them judge that. But
Yeah.
it's things like ballroom dancing, or, we have some friends that they go dancing all the time. And they actually take dance classes and everything. So, and they're in their 70s.
What kind of work do you do? What kind of business you got?
I'm a resume writer and a career coach.
Oh, okay.
That's what I do all day, every day. And then my side gig, if you will, I am a trained opera singer. And so I sing and I direct our church's choir.
Oh.
So I have 2 jobs. But the one's part-time. The choir director's part-time.
Well, that's good. Yeah, so if I have any questions, I'll probably be able to ask you in person. But I'm glad you're gonna put that on my email, though.
Yeah, Elena's going to send that to you.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can let Elena know if you have any questions. She can send them my way.
Okay.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well,
Okay.
then I think I've taken enough of your time tonight. I really appreciate you spending this time with me.
Me too.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
How do I end it? Oh,
There
There
should
should be
be
a
a
button.
little thing. If you hover over it over on the right-hand side, there'll be a little guy walking out the door and it says leave.
I don't see leave.
Hover over the bottom, the very bottom of the page.
I think I may have found it.
There you go.
Okay. There.
That's so cute. Just in
Well,
time
thank
for
you
my
very
husband to come
much.
home and my dogs to start barking, chances are. And the one came in here at one point. At least they weren't like squeaky, 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 squeaky with a toy. I was so glad that they did not do that to Mama.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our viewers will appreciate that too. Thank you.
You're
Bye-bye.
very